Hello and welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. I'm Liz Alverson, the Director of Communications for TNC in Massachusetts. I'm normally behind the scenes producing webinars, but today I'm serving as your host because we have a very special guest, our State Director, Deb Markowitz. Deb is normally our host, but today she's going to be in the hot seat to answer your questions for the full hour. This webinar marks the start of our fall programming, and we just wanted to thank the thousands of you who have been tuning into our webinars and sharing them with your friends. You can check out the fall lineup at nature.org/MA webinars to secure your spot. And if you have suggestions or ideas for us, please email me at liz.alverson@tnc.org. We'd love to hear your suggestions for topics, guests, and how we can do better. And with that, I'll introduce our very special guest today, Deb Markowitz. Deb is the State Director for TNC in Massachusetts. She was elected Vermont Secretary of State 6 times. After running for Vermont governor in 2010, she narrowly lost in the primary and was appointed Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, where she served until 2017. Before joining TNC, Deb was the VP of Programs at Ceres. She taught environmental policy and leadership at the University of Vermont and was the Director of Policy Outreach at the Gund Institute of Environment. She graduated from the University of Vermont and Georgetown Law Center and received a certificate in public leadership from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She's really quite impressive, and I'm not just saying that because she's my boss. As you think of questions for Deb, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat. And thanks to those of you who submitted questions by email in advance. Thank you so much. Welcome, Deb.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to be here, as you say, in the hot seat. For folks watching, you should just know that Liz Alverson is a superstar. She's done an incredible job since the start of the pandemic, developing this webinar series where we bring really interesting people to come and talk to you about important issues facing the planet. And one of the things I've been so impressed with during my time at TNC, and as Liz mentioned, it's been about 18 months that I've been the director here, is the folks who work in the chapter, from the scientists to the fundraisers to our communication staff, are all really mission driven. Like, we're about saving the planet. Like, it's not a small thing. We're really focused every day on how can we contribute to making the world a better place and solving these huge environmental crises. And, since this summer, with the floods and hurricanes and fires and drought all at the same time, it's more important than ever that we're getting this job done. And I just feel so honored to be part of TNC. So I don't know. I think that we've got some questions in advance. So thank you.
We have a lot. Yes. So we should dive right in so we can get to all of them. So many people submitted questions by email. So thank you so much. And if you have questions for Deb, it's not too late. You can put them in the Q&A box and we will get to
I was a politician, so I'm used to speaking off the cuff about stuff that I may or may not know anything about.
Well, all right, we'll buckle up for that. Okay, so Deb, a lot of people wanted to know why TNC, what brought you to TNC and why Massachusetts?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons. I've had this really rich career in leadership and really believe in the power of regulation and government to scale solutions to really have an impact. But, we've also gotten whiplash, right? I would bet you all have experienced this whiplash as governments change, and all of a sudden, Obama's really bold climate policy goes by the wayside because a new president comes in. And it made me realize just how important the non-governmental sector was to making the progress we need to make to save the planet. Really, it's not such a small thing. And, when I got out of government, when I left my position at the Agency of Natural Resources, I got onto one board, and it was the Nature Conservancy board, and in Vermont, where I had served. And I chose the Nature Conservancy because, after Tropical Storm Irene hit Vermont about 10 years ago. I'm sorry, yeah, I guess 10 years ago. It's time, flies. What I saw was the Nature Conservancy playing an incredibly important role in helping us think about how to build back better. How to use conservation to address the serious risks to communities from climate change, and also how to use nature to mitigate, how to draw down the carbon from the atmosphere. I was really impressed by the science. I was impressed that as an organization, we think at scale, right? We have a global view of the problems and the solutions, but then we touch down locally. And so I like that. I just found it so powerful. And so when this position opened up in Massachusetts, these positions do not open up very often. People stay in them forever, right? Because they're so great. I just had to put my name in. And, I had been working briefly for Ceres, which is also a really impactful organization that looks at our economic system. It essentially says, it holds corporations responsible for their environmental footprint by engaging all of us who own stock and shares and have retirement funds by, voting our shares or exercising our rights as owners to force them. And that's really important, but it didn't hit me in the heart the way the Nature Conservancy does. Like, I really am a believer in conservation and science to help solve our environmental problems. So Massachusetts, like, there's more, it's not just serendipity, like Massachusetts that happened to be open. I would have gone to New Jersey, New York. No, Massachusetts actually plays a really unique role when it comes to climate change because, think about it. We're one of the only places in the country where there is bipartisan support for bold climate action. And there's differences around the edges. Some want us to go faster, some want us to go slower. But the truth is, we've got a Republican administration, a dominant Democratic legislature, all acting together, setting really bold goals that had been set a while by prior administrations and legislatures, but to implement it. And that's going to endure over time. And it's going to be an example for states and countries around the world. I mean, I just think what we do here in Massachusetts really matters. We have an oversized impact. In part, we've got a pretty significant economy. We've got the brain trusts of all of our incredible academic institutions. So we really have the science here. But it is that bipartisan support that can demonstrate success. So there's so much opportunity. And of course, when we think on the other side, that's the positive side. On the negative side, we're at the front line of climate impacts. Sea level rise faster, in our area than almost anywhere else in the world. The warming of the ocean faster than almost anywhere else in the world. When we think about land conversion, the amount of development that's happening, pretty fast over here. It's really, we're losing nature. And so when we think about those two big challenges facing the planet, which is, biodiversity loss and climate change, we're in the center, both on the challenge and on the opportunity for solutions.
That's so great. You're always talking about how special TNC is for our ability to scale from local to global and how science-based we are. And I know that you do feel really strongly about that and about the opportunities to set this, to be a leader in climate change in Massachusetts. So thank you, Deb, for putting your name in. We appreciate it.
You should know that she always teases me about my optimism, because I'm so optimistic that we're going to get this right. I mean, there will be impacts. There are impacts from climate change, and we will adapt. We'll figure it out. But I do know there's so many people working on solutions that we are gonna make a difference.
Well, we do love your optimism, Deb. Thank you for always being optimistic. On that note, you joined TNC at the beginning of a not so optimistic time during the beginning of the pandemic. So it's been about 18 months since you've taken the reins. What have you noticed that surprised you over your almost 2-year term?
Well, so folks should know, I started the Nature Conservancy in this role on March 2nd, like a year and a half ago. And the very next week, everyone was sent home because of the pandemic. And so it's been a really interesting time to start. And one of the things that impressed me so much is that the show went on. Like, our staff are so resilient. They went home. They, people had different levels of personal impact from the pandemic. Some folks ended up having to homeschool children as a surprise. Others had elderly parents that they had to worry about. And of course, at that time, we were all worried because we didn't know what this pandemic would mean for us, and as personally, but also, as a community and in the world. And the Nature Conservancy as an organization really stepped up. They put people first. So, and that's been my leadership mode, right? It's like, if you don't put people first, you're not accomplishing anything, right? You're not, because you only accomplish things through, the human resource that you have. And so I was impressed first by how the World Office staff, were supported by their HR folks and their risk management folks, how they really put people first, were really there for me as a leader and a manager, and, the folks responsible as somebody responsible for the chapter, and gave me the flexibility to do what I needed to do to make sure each one of our employees could be successful working remotely. And we did. And I was just so surprised that the work really went on. There were some little things we couldn't do, and over time we figured out how to do it remotely. But we've had some of our most successful years these past couple of years, despite the fact that we're all under this added stress and strain, and that we're not in the office together. And just so the resilience, I think, has been remarkable. The other thing that I was impressed by, understand, when you're in politics, you kind of are isolated. And even in the governor's cabinet, because the other cabinet members are doing such different things, you don't really have colleagues at my level. And this is the first time in my whole career that I've had amazing colleagues. Every state has, there's chapters in most states, some of the chapters are multiple states, but so I've got colleagues all around the country and the world, really, leading, different business units for TNC. And, I started getting calls as soon as I started from my colleagues in New England saying, hey, how can I help if you have any questions? And I would take them up on it. And it was just such a deep pleasure getting to know people who've some of whom have been in TNC their whole career, and being able to lean on them for support. That's made a tremendous difference. So that was another surprise, that as a global organization, we really are a community for each other and can learn from each other and support each other.
That's wonderful. I bet it's nice to have people you can connect with and ask questions.
Well, I assume you find it too, right, Liz? In your role?
I do. I mean, I have my counterparts in the different business units are incredible. So I often will copy what they do or ask them questions, because why reinvent the wheel? I mean, they're doing great work. So, okay, we have another one. What do you see as the biggest environmental challenge facing the state?
Oh, well, so that's a great question. Obviously it's climate change, right? And because it impacts everything, right? It is the multiplier effect for whatever the environmental challenge is. And, in Massachusetts, as I said earlier, we've got sea level rise, we've got storms and floods, and we also have a lot of land conversion, right? There's development that is taking land out of its natural state. So I think there's tremendous opportunities to think about, how do we make sure that, we address, like, there's a real crisis in affordable housing, right, in Massachusetts. It's got to be managed. We've got to address it. And so how do we do that in a way that that doesn't make some of these flooding problems worse, for example, or pollution problems? We've got a nitrogen pollution problems in our bays, and it's creating, algae blooms that are killing the fishery and impacting ocean health and community health. And we can do it all. And in Massachusetts, we've got tremendous opportunities to address climate change on both sides. Again, with very progressive policies to really double down on clean energy options. There's offshore wind that's being proposed that will have a significant impact. And we know from global studies that we're not solving climate change without offshore wind. It's because it's a base load energy that is clean and green once it's in. And as TNC, we're working to provide tools to help developers and regulators make sure that when we're putting in wind, we're doing it in a way that doesn't harm the ocean ecosystems and the fisheries. So, there is a lot on the western side of the state. We think a lot about connectivity and one of the things we know is that the global warming is happening. The temperature, the climate is changing. We don't know the pace or scale of it, but we know it's happening over time. It's clearly demonstrated. And so we have some species that are going to need to migrate. Some of them are the kind that walk, and some of them are the kind that reseed themselves. Trees species will change. We need to make sure that we've got a connected landscape so that there can be this migration of species over time with climate change. And so we're looking at particularly the Appalachians, the western part of our state, which connects ecosystems all the way from the Blue Ridge Mountains up to the boreal forests in Quebec. I mean, it's really a tremendous opportunity to, if we make sure there's connection across that landscape, we will really be contributing to biodiversity protection over time.
Thank you so much, Deb. And we have a related question from Anne Lombard. She wants to know how we can move faster to make a significant difference regarding the climate crisis. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we could be doing. Right now in the state government, they're putting in place action plans coming out of the most recent, global warming protection, laws or prevention laws. And we have a tremendous opportunity in the next coming years with major dollars coming to our state for infrastructure. That infrastructure bill that was just passed is going to bring a lot of dollars for work in Massachusetts across the state. We could be using those dollars in ways that advance our climate goals. Every dollar that goes into the ground should be making us more resilient. It should be giving us climate smart options. And so I suggest everyone pay attention to that. How's that money going to get spent? Let's not keep building new roads. Like, we don't need new roads. We need new public transportation. It's always surprising to me. It's like, why are we charging people for public transportation, but the roads are somewhat free? I mean, I know there's a gas tax that's paying for them, but when I drive on the roads, I'm not paying a thing, right? And yet, I've got to use my Charlie card, to get onto the T. And can we align incentives? Can we make it? And there's an equity and justice piece to that as well, of course, right? As thinking about how to make it possible for people to travel without adding to their climate footprint. So I think that is a big one, is pay attention to what's going on with implementation and follow the dollars. Like, how are we spending our money? And I would say on a personal level, this was, I don't know if any of you ever remember any graduation speech you've ever heard given, but my son, who's my youngest, at his middle school graduation, I know I was like, middle school graduation? Yes, middle school graduation. They asked the teacher to give a talk. He gave the best talk I ever heard for graduation. And his whole theme was create more, consume less. And it was an environmental talk about saving the planet. And if we would all think about that, how do we create more? Like, we make more of the stuff ourselves and consume less, buy less stuff. When we think about the climate footprint, in the United States of America, it's our consumption. It's every time we, that Amazon is so tempting, and, all of that. Like, think, do you really need it? Can you buy it used? Can you make it yourself? And if we would just consume a little less, that could go a long way. So we could have a whole session, maybe we should have a whole session on, how we can move faster. We have to transform our economy. That's the other piece, is we really need to think about how we incentivize things in our economy. I served on the board of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a market-based approach to managing carbon in the electric sector. Very successful. I'm very proud of that work. And Massachusetts has signed on to the Transportation Climate Initiative, and I think there's tremendous potential there as well. The real question is, how do we transform the economy in a way that we're thinking equitably, that we're making sure that the benefits of this new economy reaches frontline communities and communities of color that have not gotten the benefits of some of our environmental work. And we need to do that fast to make a difference. We need to change our economy.
Those are all great points. And I know my husband would be supportive of your message to buy less on Amazon. So I won't let him watch this recording. We have a question from Gary Markowitz, who claims no relation. He says,
well, actually, Gary, you should know I am a Markowitz. So I was a Markowitz at birth, and then I married a Markowitz. So
could be related somehow.
Who knows?
Gary is wondering about your thoughts on the deficiencies of our current power distribution grid in terms of capacity, reliability, and smarts. The grid throughout the greater Boston area and most old guard urban areas is not ready for the electrified future. What will it take to get us there in terms of cost and time? And thanks, Gary, for that thoughtful question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the great things about the Nature Conservancy is that we operate cross-border, and we're actually working across New England and then including New York to think about how we can in a regional way, what are the regional barriers to action on climate change, to successful action on climate change? And so we did a process where we brought stakeholders and had a lot of conversations to look at where the barriers were, where the opportunities were for the greatest progress on climate change. Because, all of the states have made these ambitious climate goals. Well, what would stand in the way of success? And Gary, to your point, we've ended up focusing on the grid, the fact that major decisions about how we get electricity to people, right from where it's produced to where it's used, these decisions are made by an organization called ISO New England. And the different governors appoint somebody to serve on ISO New England. But after that, they're really not accountable. And how they make their decisions is kind of behind closed doors. And all the public sunshine laws don't really apply to them. And that's a problem, because what happens is there's an economic incentive. We are all sharing the cost state by state for these investments in those the poles and wires that get the electric, to our homes. And it's all that old system of having a centralized production plant and then all the poles and wires coming out, as opposed to distributed generation, which is really different. So right now, for example, if you want to put in a solar field or wind, you have to say, okay, where do you hook up with 3-phase wire, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's the thing you need in order to get your energy into the grid so that it can be then, sent where people need it for turning on their lights. And so we need to rethink about how we make those decisions and invest in our grid. And our project is really looking at that. We're going to be bringing in some expertise to help us dig in to make sure that we're doing it right. And again, making sure that as we're putting in distributed generation, we're doing it in an equitable way. We're not putting it in those same communities that have housed our solid waste facilities and the big power plants. Like, how do we make sure that we're doing this in a smart way? We're going to be having some of those conversations as we look at offshore wind, because offshore wind is that model of production and then distribution, as opposed to, a solar, which tends to be much more distributed. And we've got to get that right if we're going to succeed. There are a lot of smart minds working on that right now, though. And I'm happy to offline tell you more about the project we're working on regionally.
Thank you, Deb. David Hannon is saying, we're reading articles and listening to news reports that some of the carbon offsets might not be accomplishing the goals that are intended. In some situations, the offsets financially benefit the nonprofit while the polluter just keeps acting in the same manner. In the end, we're not making the progress that we need. In some, we're not realizing a reduction in carbon production. Can you speak to how the Massachusetts, chapter is working in this area and how you are able to demonstrate real progress?
Yeah, so first of all, with respect, this is a great question and timely. There was actually an article today in, I think, the LA Times that talked about the California market and some of the complexities here, and the fact that the Nature Conservancy, in terms of our national and global work, has really looked at all of our offset programs. And let me just step back for folks who may be on and not have any idea what we're talking about here. And so let me describe what this issue is and what the conversation is about. So, as we are, as companies, for example, are making commitments to become carbon neutral, or in the California carbon market, what happens is electric and folks who are producing electricity have to buy offsets if they're for the carbon they're producing, or for transportation fuels, they've got to buy offsets to compensate for some of their pollution. They've got to draw it down, they've got to pollute less, but for some of it, they're allowed to offset it by investing in forests, for example, that are drawing carbon down out of the atmosphere. The goal, though, is to make sure that we're reducing carbon overall. So, one of the things I like to say is, so long as we like to eat clementines and avocados in the winter, there will be some carbon footprint associated with how we're living, right? If, so long as, because we don't yet have a solution to everything, we don't have a way to electrify, our transportation of goods in a significant way, right? Both thinking about bringing things across the ocean on barges or airplanes, right? And we have electric cars. Maybe over time we'll figure out solutions. So if we're going to get to our goals of zero carbon by, being carbon neutral by 2050 and ambitious goals by 2030, offsets will be part of what we do, saying, okay, we can't get all of the carbon out, so let's invest in things that will draw carbon down. Let's invest in projects that will draw carbon down. So this is a great conversation to be happening, because it's necessary to get this right if we're going to solve climate change. Like, we're not going to solve climate change without really holding our feet to the fire and making sure that when we are putting in carbon offset projects, that we can demonstrate the reductions of carbon that we're counting on, to that offsets, in some case, pollution, or helps us get to, our pledged goals. In Massachusetts ourselves, we don't have any of these projects. So we are working, though. We did get a grant to work with forest owners, family forest owners, to help demonstrate practices that are carbon smart, forestry that draws down carbon, that's designed to store carbon. So we're developing some of the science that's going to be really important for getting this right. That's the kind of projects we have right now. They're more research projects and demonstration projects in how to get this right. Overall, though, some of our neighbors have some really cutting edge projects. In Vermont, they have a really exciting cutting edge project that is a carbon offset project. And I would say the critique, people may recall there was some articles about the Massachusetts Audubon chapter kind of getting in trouble with this. And it's complicated, because what happened is they followed all the rules for the California market, and they put some of their existing conserved land into the program. And when you measure how much carbon you're saving, you're doing as compared to what? So they were comparing it to cutting the trees, or cutting a bunch of the trees, and how much lost carbon there would be over time. When really, as the Audubon, they're probably not cutting those trees. So at the Nature Conservancy, we face that same issue, right? So what are we, when we're counting carbon, storage, in an additive way, what is our baseline that we're comparing to? And you'll see in the chat, we have an illustrated guide that you should definitely look at to show how carbon offsets work. And so I've been really proud of TNC's approach. As soon as there was any question about it, we did this internal audit to say, are we using the right baseline? We want to make sure that what we're doing really cuts the mustard, that, our goal is saving the planet. And it's true, it brings in dollars, and maybe those dollars we're using to actually conserve more forests, and so we're looking for additionality. Like, how are we doing more so that we can achieve our goals? So hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to talk more about it if you've got more specific questions, but in a nutshell, we're really not doing it in Massachusetts. We are doing it in the Nature Conservancy, and I'm really proud at, how we're really stepping up to making sure we're getting it right, because it's important work.
Thank you, Deb. That was wonderful. Sam Carlson asked, what are TNC in Massachusetts ideas and plans for expanding conversations with Native American tribes interested in increasing access to TNC managed lands for cultural, religious, sacred, medicinal, fishing, and hunting purposes?
I love that question. And Sam, nice to see you or hear your question. Sam was a trustee of the Nature Conservancy well before my time, but more importantly, he is the brother of one of my dear friends for a long time, and also of a former, I'm a lawyer, I don't know if you knew that, but a former legal colleague who had a brother who became a judge, actually, who's really pretty impressive in Vermont. And so this is a great conversation that we're having across conservancies. How do we really engage with the tribes in our area? And we're just at the beginning stage in Massachusetts and in thinking about what the opportunities could be for us. We actually have a whole group of staff who are starting to really take a look at where our work overlays with tribes across Massachusetts. There have been a couple of really exciting projects that have been done in other chapters in the Nature Conservancy, including, I think, 100,000 acres, some huge conservation deal that happened in Canada recently, where TNC made the conservation investment and then gave the land over to the tribe, back to the tribe for management and to restoring the traditional tribal rights to the land. And then we're working very closely with tribes in Alaska, where there's a tremendous population of indigenous people, helping to empower them to, again, think about conservation opportunities that would meet their goals in the Emerald Edge, which is a part of Alaska that's pretty special.
And we have done webinars on both of those initiatives. So maybe Lauren can put those in the chat for folks if you want to watch those.
We're putting a lot of things in the chat.
We have a lot of links.
We'll put them in a follow-up email as well, so
yes,
you don't catch it all.
We can do that. Deb, Peter Van Oot would like to know, with climate change and sea level rise threatening our critical saltwater marshes, can you talk about TNC in Massachusetts efforts to protect and make our saltwater marshes more resilient? I'm especially interested in projects on Cape Cod, where I live, on a salt marsh. So very, very
nice. Nice. And this is Old Home Day. So Pete, nice to see you as well. So Peter Van Oot is also another former Vermonter, a lawyer who I've known for most of my career and served with me on the board of the Nature Conservancy in Vermont. And so he's since moved to Cape Cod. and it's great to have you on. So we are doing a lot on the Cape to clean up nitrogen pollution. So as I'd mentioned earlier, there's a real problem with nitrogen pollution in our bays that's affecting ocean health and the fisheries, and creating algae blooms and so we're doing a number of things. So for example, in Barnstable, we've got a project where we're working with the community on their on-site septic. I mean, it's not a sexy topic to talk about, but it's really important. There's a lot of Cape Cod, the homes have their own individual septic systems or small community systems, and those were not built to prevent nitrogen pollution leaking out, and that's been problematic. So when you trace the nitrogen pollution where it's coming from, those on-site septics are a problem. So we have been working with the EPA and the towns to redesign how those are built. So using natural processes to take out nitrogen, and incidentally, we're finding they're also taking out pharmaceuticals, because you may also know that hormones like estrogen from women taking the pill or testosterone end up in the water, as well as other pharmaceuticals, and have an impact on the things that live there. And so we have been working with our different financing mechanisms. We've got an organization called NatureVest to help us think about how to scale through finance solutions. And so that's one piece of work we're doing on the Cape. We're also working to clean up nitrogen pollution in other ways. That salt marshes play a really important role of cleaning water. And so we're helping to restore about 1,000 acres of salt marsh in the Herring River estuary in Wellfleet. And I had a chance to take a walk along the area, and it's really a remarkable, it's just a remarkable ecosystem. There's a lot of work still to do, but it'll make a tremendous impact. It's a big estuary, it'll have a big impact. The Herring River, is coming back to life, and it'll matter so much for the fishery. So it's really important work, and we're, one of the things that I love about the Nature Conservancy is, like other organizations, environmental organizations, we do projects, and projects are great. But at the Nature Conservancy, a project is never just a project. Everything we're doing, we're looking to scale. So we're looking to learn something that we can then scale through our networks, or by policy, or working with EPA to change their regulations. Like, how do we take what we learned with a solution we've identified and get it to scale? And the things we're doing on Cape Cod's a great example of that scaling mentality. The other thing that we're doing on the Cape, which is really exciting, which you probably have all heard about because it's gotten a lot of press nationally, New York Times and Boston Globe, it's just Washington, but like everyone's been focused because it's a good news story. It's about our work with the oyster growers. And we have had a project for many years now working with the oyster farmers and, on the Cape to find ways to make sure that as we're, farming oysters, that we're doing in a way that enhances the ecosystem, or at least supports ecosystem health. And we know globally, most of the shellfish and actually most of the seafood we eat comes from farms. And in some places, that the scale of the farming and the techniques that are being used are hurting the ocean ecosystems and the ocean health. And so we were, again, studying how to do this in a way that supports ocean health so that we can, take what we've learned and apply it in Indonesia and places around the world that are doing this at huge scales. And then the pandemic hit. And one of the things that happened was the oyster farmers found that, people weren't buying their oysters because mostly you eat this kind of shellfish at restaurants, and all the restaurants were closed. And so the oysters started to get too big to be saleable in the market. So we, with a partnership with Pew Charitable and some donors, we were able to put in place a program where we were able to purchase these overlarge oysters and used it to seed natural oyster beds and restore some of the natural oyster beds that existed in Cape Cod and have been, long gone because of kind of over harvesting over time. And one thing we know about oysters and shellfish is they are the purifiers of our ocean water. And so the more we can restore those natural oyster beds, the more we're addressing nutrient pollution and the nitrogen pollution that's so problematic. So we're getting it at both angles. What's happening on shore makes a difference, and what happens in the ocean makes a difference.
And Lauren just put a link in the chat to more information about our aquaculture and SOAR work, including a video that we produced. I got to meet some of the oyster farmers who benefited, and they really said that this was game changing for them during the pandemic when they're weren't sure if they were going to be able to get income for the oysters that they had put in the water, the year before, not knowing this was going to happen. So that was really a game changer for a lot of folks, and a really creative and cool way for TNC to get involved. Deb, Nancy Poland is wondering, can you talk about TNC's Resilient and Connected Lands mapping tool? She says she knows this is being utilized in New York, Connecticut, and Vermont, and are we utilizing it in Massachusetts? And if not, why?
Oh, we sure are. We actually started here. So this tool started in Massachusetts. Mark Anderson is the scientist who's the brainchild of this project, and he's not the brainchild. The project is his brainchild, and it started in Massachusetts where Mark started looking at how the Berkshire links to up into Massachusetts, to Vermont, into Connecticut, and down, and thinking about those linkages and how do we, at scale, create a tool that would allow us to make decisions. As you know, like there's so much land that could be conserved. Like we would love to conserve. There's a saying, I've been told that there's never been a conservation opportunity that I haven't fallen in love with, right? I love conservation, but there's not enough money to do it all. So how do we be most strategic? And thinking back to this goal of a connected and resilient landscape that can support multiple kinds of ecosystems over time, because we don't know what's going to happen. So in Mark's work, what he's looking for is complexity, meaning on the landscape, there's actual complexity. There's different things that are happening. There could be a really warm southern side with a valley that's really, that's much colder because it's in the shadow of the mountain. And so that as there's a migration of species, there's some place that this species would be able to land where it could survive and thrive over time. And so, so as we think about this, it's about an exercise in biodiversity and climate resilience. How do we create a resilient landscape so that species can survive over time? And because we were the first out, the first data and the first maps were Massachusetts, we're actually the demonstration state in how to embed those maps and that information into the state and how the state does its work and prioritizes, and the priorities of of other organizations. So our science is used by the trustees, it's used by local land trusts, it's used by Audubon, and most importantly, it's used by the state. And most recently, there was a great example. There was a new bill about solar siting. I am sure some of you are aware that there are occasions when, unfortunate occasions, when people have clear-cut forests to put up solar. And, there's a lot of open land for solar. So how do we put our renewables, and we need solar, I'm not against solar, but, there may be times when you have to cut a little forest around the solar field to make it work, but how do we do this right? And so there was a new solar law that created incentives for developing solar, but required the developers to show that they were not developing in areas that our maps, the maps that they now use as part of their biomap. It's the foundation of their biomap tool. That it wasn't an area in biomap that had high value for biodiversity, or for, now they're looking at carbon as well.
Thanks, Deb. And Melissa Clark, who's on Mark's team and one of the brilliant scientists who works on the tool, put the link to the Resilient and Connected Lands tool in the chat. And then I put the more communications audience article after that, in case you want to read an overview of that. And we also just shot a video with Mark and some other experts, and we'll be releasing that in the coming days. We're just putting the final touches on that. So I hope that's another way to educate people about the ways that this tool can be used. Deb, we have so many questions, so I'm going to try to get to all of them. I know we have about 14 minutes left. Neil Sanders wonders, how do you guard against mission creep? I asked the question for two reasons. First, I don't see any evidence at TNC Massachusetts of that management error, and wonder how you and your predecessor avoided it. And second, I do see evidence of it at another otherwise well-managed conservation organization that I support financially. So I think the question is, how do we stay in our lane, Deb? How do you keep us strategic?
It really is. It's not an easy thing, right? Because we are so ambitious for change and impact. But one of the things that I've learned as a leader over the years is that you can't really do everything. So you need to focus on what you can do best. So we are always asking ourselves, as the Nature Conservancy, what's our biggest contribution? And what's our biggest contribution to the most important challenges, the most urgent challenges facing the state? And I actually give credit to one of our scientists, one of our great scientists, Allison Bowden. She's, works in our conservation team, and she's always asking that. She's saying, let's be strategic. Is this, how we as the Nature Conservancy can make the biggest impact? And is this the biggest, most important thing we can touch? And so we're asking ourselves that regularly. It is a really robust ecosystem of organizations. And one of the pleasures I've had is starting to get to know the leaders of some of those other organizations in the state. And so, for example, there's a couple of organizations whose primary mission is getting people outside. And one of the things we saw during this pandemic was just how important access to nature was to our health and happiness and well-being. And so there was a temptation for us to all of a sudden say, oh, we should be thinking about more access to nature. And it's like, you know what? We don't need to. That's covered. Like, we have some, beautiful spots around the state that are preserved. We've got preserves. But I would say most of our preserves are not preserves for biodiversity, not people. Some of them are, but mostly, it's about what nature is doing for us in those places. And so I'm very much I really am a believer in getting people outside, but it does not have to be our role. That being said, I think about the impact of climate change in our built communities, and how there will be a disproportionate impact in some of our frontline communities of climate change. And so I'm really interested in saying, okay, as the Nature Conservancy, when we're thinking about, for example, restoring salt marshes, there are salt marshes in areas that are, that if it was restored, it could do multiple things for these frontline communities. They could provide protection from sea level rise. It could help restore the estuary so that there's better fishing. And it could make the community more livable by creating green space. And there's a place, Belle Isle Marsh, which is in the Boston Harbor, which is an example of a restoration project, a salt marsh restoration that is also syncs with this vision and the values and our interest in helping making sure that what we're providing, the benefits we're providing in Massachusetts, are actually helping communities that really could use it.
We have a nice comment from Kathy Orlando in the chat, who says helping to incentivize redirecting solar onto developed land redeveloped areas, landfills, et cetera, is really key to ensuring that the ecological and agricultural lands are not lost while working towards more green energy. So just wanted to flag
Yeah.
that important comment. And Deb, I have a sort of a related question from a donor who says, I've supported TNC in the past for its mission to protect the environment and save the planet. Over the past 2 years, the mission seems to have changed to equity and justice, which is certainly not why I support TNC. Will TNC get back on track to focus on its core mission of conservation and not equity and justice? So I think the question is, has the mission of the Nature Conservancy?
Yeah, so the mission of the Nature Conservancy hasn't changed. Our mission, we've doubled down on our mission, which is to, protect biodiversity and address climate change. Absolutely double down. What we're talking about right now with diversity, equity, inclusion, justice is about how we do our work. And so the mission hasn't changed, but it's being more deliberate about how we're doing it, making sure that we're not, that, we recognize that, how we interact with communities matters, and what communities we're interacting with matters. It's like the question we got from Sam about Indigenous communities. I mean, there's tremendous opportunities to partner with communities who've been here a lot longer than we have, who have a lot of knowledge about the land and the ocean, and so, doing conservation with that in mind, it doesn't change our mission. It just changes how we're rolling it out. I'm proud of our chapter and in setting that balance, and I'm proud of the Nature Conservancy for really taking this seriously and already showing results. I think it's exciting to see the projects we're doing, for example, in Alaska and in Canada, showing, in real time how these kinds of partnerships can really advance our goals in significant ways.
Okay, we are approaching the end here, so I'm going to try to get to as many more as we can because we have a few more here. So Katie DeGoosh is wondering, could you talk about some specific actions or projects you envision TNC in Massachusetts and New England will do to lead the way when it comes to tackling climate change?
Well, I mentioned earlier, there's this, this multi-state project we're working on, where we're going to be bringing in leaders from all different sectors to help us really think about what are those barriers that would keep states from being able to achieve their ambitious goals. So that's one very specific piece of work we're doing. You may know that TNC is a leading voice with policymakers. I'm so impressed by our policy team, our government relations team. We work very closely with the administration, with legislators, to look at how are we rolling out our goals. How are we going to achieve our very ambitious goals? And right now we're working really closely with them all on the climate funding bill. It's money talks. It's like, how do we get the money on the ground that's going to help us achieve our ambitious goals? And then we're doing very exciting work, as I mentioned before, on carbon sequestration and managing forests for carbon. And we have a handbook that's just coming out for forest land owners, because you may know that most of the forests in New England, not just in Massachusetts, are owned by families. Because they've always owned the land, they like it, or very often it's not investment. Now, with the exception of Maine, where there's a lot of paper company land still, a lot of industrial ownership still of the woodlands, but and so we're not going to be able to fully take advantage of trees as solution without engaging the family forest owners. So that's a big piece. We just rolled out a tool that is designed to help regulators and developers of the offshore wind, all those wind proposals. And I think that's going to be a really important. We're doing some work and looking at how how when they are putting the wind, the wind turbines into the ocean bed, how to do it in a way that can enhance the ocean environment for the fisheries, and how to balance the needs of fishermen as we're placing wind turbines. And I think that's going to be really, really important. And then we're still working on thinking about what's our role of transportation, in ensuring that as the Transportation Climate Initiative really is rolled out, that the benefits of that new market-based approach reaches all of the communities, especially the frontline communities.
Okay, we have two more here. Brian asks, many climate change deniers do not relent, even in the face of documented warming of the planet and oceans, and the increasing frequency of severe weather. So how do we overcome this, especially when it emanates from political leaders making policy and budget decisions?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous power in the governor's offices. And that's because even in Texas, even in places where the Republican leaders won't use the word climate change. And actually, there's some places where the Democratic leaders won't either. It's sort of the people just aren't quite there yet. And so the leaders, aren't willing to take leadership on climate change. They're still looking at disasters. They're still, they're the front line of, when things go wrong, like Louisiana, those hurricanes, climate disasters, they've got to do the cleanup, they've got to address it. And so, Texas is actually a really good example, right? You think of Texas and you think of oil and gas, but Texas has some of the most that has the most wind in almost anywhere, I think, in the world. I'm making that up, so I don't know if it's the world, but they get a tremendous amount of their energy from wind, and they've had more coal plants closed than many places. That whole region has shuttered the coal plants, put in wind, and it's because it's cost effective. Wind costs about a third of coal energy in the Great Plains area of the United States. So I would kind of keep my eye on the prize. Like, what are the solutions? We want to get off coal. We want to get off fossil fuel. We want to convert to green energy. We want to create incentives to begin to electrify our fleets, right? And to again convert off of fossil fuels. Same thing with our heat and cooling of our homes. And that's happening around the country, even in places where climate change is not a word that can be used. On the other hand, I was a politician. I know the power of voters. I think more and more we need to focus on climate voting. I mean, you think about the power of the NRA, and how by having voters say, I'm voting based on guns and Second Amendment, it really made a difference. And we need a generation of climate voters as well to do the same thing, to really push our leaders to do what's necessary. What's hopeful, and maybe I'll leave us on a moment of hope, is that even coming out of an administration that tried to get us out of the Paris Climate Accord and tried to turn away from action on climate change, we have made tremendous progress in the past 5 years. Now we've got to do more. We've got to double down, but I am optimistic that we know what it takes to get the job done, and there's a real commitment to do it. So I want to thank you all for being part of the solution and joining us today and being part of the solution.
Well, thank you, Deb, for ending us on a moment of hope and for spending the full hour answering everyone's questions. And thank you all in the audience for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what really makes all of our work possible. So we'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. If you are enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends. We'd love to bring in more people to learn about our work. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. As always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars. And next week, we'll be hearing from TNC and Mass Audubon, about a new partnership to protect the Maya forest in Belize. You won't want to miss it, so sign up today. Thank you everyone again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, Deb. Bye.